Hello, and welcome to Pehchaan, where we unpack the stories and identities of extraordinary Pakistani Americans. Today, I've got a very special guest with me. Saira Saeed is the Senior Advisor for Public Diplomacy at the State Department. She's just an extraordinary human being who sits at the intersection of foreign policy, international development, and being a trailblazer as a Pakistani American woman in the work that she does. Today, we're going to talk to her about her career journey, her identity, and what it means to be a part of the Pakistani American community in 2023. Saira, we're so excited to have you on. Thank you for spending your Saturday with us.
Thank you, Bidal, and thank you for including me in the Pehchaan. And I'm truly honored and humbled to be a part of it, and happy to answer your questions and to share my journey and speak to you all.
Absolutely. Well, I think I want to start at the beginning. I want to start if you could take us back to your childhood and give us a little bit of color of what life was like for you growing up. What was sort of family like? Where were you growing up? What was school life like? Give us a little bit of color of what life for Saira was like when she was growing up.
Sure. I grew up primarily in New Orleans, Louisiana. But as a child, I lived in Saudi Arabia, and I also lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and Miami, Florida. But I would say that if people ask me where I'm from in the United States, I would always say New Orleans, because that's basically where I went to elementary school, middle school, and high school, and feel like my family still lives there. So New Orleans, Louisiana, when we arrived in the mid-'70s, so I'm aging myself. But at that time, it was still very racially divided. And my brother and I were the first minorities in a school, and let alone forget Muslims, forget Pakistanis, we were the only minorities of a school that was all white.
Wow.
And it was not easy for my parents to admit us or get us admitted into this school, because most of the people had lived there for generations. New Orleans is a very family-oriented society, and therefore people have lived there for generations and generations. And so they all know each other. And so to go to the school, they kind of looked to us like, where are you from? Where did you come from? And so much so that I remember one distinct story that I was called into the vice principal's office, and I was only in first grade. And I was really wondering why, because I tried to be a good student and, tried to do everything I was supposed to do. So later to find out that my mother had to come to school to give them some orientation about where Pakistan was, what Islam was, what a Muslim is, and educate them about our journey from Saudi Arabia to the United States, and then to New Orleans, and then ending up in New Orleans, Louisiana. So that was the reason. And so so it was a rather, difficult childhood in terms of being racially discriminated and having to explain my culture, my religion to many, many people over and over again, and why my shade was not black or white. And that sort of continued through high school. And so I realized at that time, my parents at that time were very much about integration, and we had friends from all different nationalities, religions, and we were very much integrated into New Orleans society, which has its own culture. But it sort of made me realize that I wanted to see the world. And luckily, I was able to travel to Pakistan every summer, thanks to my parents, and see my relatives, both on my maternal side and my paternal side. So I was very close with my nani and my dadi and my khalas and my chachas and stuff. And so therefore, I spoke Urdu from very early on and understood it. So I was grateful that my parents continued to ingrain the Pakistani culture, the Muslim culture in us every day, and going every summer helped with that.
Wow, what a remarkable, in almost, it's like, if you think about where we are in 2023 today, it just blows your mind to see that it was just such in the recent past where sort of something like this was happening. I have a couple of questions that I want to sort of deep dive into this for. Like, when you were at school, when this was happening, when your mom was called in, Is this something that you remember, or you were told later that your mom had to come in and explain where Pakistan was, what Islam was? And the reason why I'm getting into this is like, at what point of your consciousness as a child did you realize you were different than the rest of the kids sort of in your class?
Well, I realized I think this was at age 6, and I remember sitting in the vice principal's office, right? I remember that I didn't understand why I was there. And my mother didn't tell me that she was coming to school. She didn't want me to feel that I was different, and that I, for some reason, they needed to explain all of this. So I just remember seeing a glimpse of my mother wearing a shalwar kameez and leaving the school. And normally she didn't do that when she went to public events, or when she was going out during the day. My mother wears Western clothes even till this day. But so it was very strange to me to see my mother at school wearing a shalwar kameez. And so I asked her afterwards, and she said, no, I didn't come. Like, she just didn't want me to forget, like, that she didn't want me to realize that there's something different that happened that day. But I asked her later, and she said, yes, that she did. So it was something that, and I would frequently go and ask my mother, why am I brown? Why am I not white or black like everybody else? I particularly asked about being white because the school was all white. And so she just, at that time didn't have much of an answer for me, but she told me that God made people different colors, and this is just who I am. But I frequently would wonder, why am I brown? Why am I here? And so it was difficult, because my father tells us that just 2 years before he moved in, his staff and things told him that it was a segregated environment, and that he would not have been allowed to work in New Orleans. And they had separate restrooms for colored people, and they had separate restaurants, and that, as some of his white staff told him, that they wouldn't have been allowed to work for him because he was a colored man. Just 2 years before we moved to New Orleans, Louisiana. And so my father now tells me that when he trained in Cleveland, and he said that people in Cleveland asked him, why would you go to New Orleans? And he didn't think much of it at the time, because he just didn't like the cold weather. It was all about temperature. He had been in England, and he just didn't like cold weather, and he didn't want to deal with snow. For him, it was only in Florida or Louisiana where he got job offers. And they liked Louisiana better. They had lived in Miami, and they just preferred Louisiana. They thought the slower pace of life was better for them, and they just didn't think anything of the racial discrimination until they got there. But I think it was, my father was well reputed, and he was accepted, but the only way to do so was he really got engaged in American football from the beginning, and sports. And that's how he really acclimated, and he's still a very big sports fan. So he was acclimated. My mother is very active, and so she really worked hard to make sure that we were all integrated, and volunteering at school, making sure that she found the best schools for us, that we were well-rounded, and that she would communicate with everyone. Like I said, white, black, doesn't matter what religion. We had friends that were of all religions. And so she made sure to make us feel that we were integrated into that society. And till this day, my mother makes a real effort to make sure that she has American friends who were born and raised New Orleanians. They could be white or black, and she makes friends with everyone. So it's because of both of them that they really loved it, and they really took it on their own initiative, and they didn't stay in a bubble, which, some people have the opportunities to do when they come to the United States as immigrants. They can just go into their same immigrant or Muslim bubble and never meet people outside. But the time that we moved to New Orleans, there were no Muslim. There were some African American Muslims, and they had their own mosques. And so at that point, my father started a mosque with someone originally from Iran or Turkey. So it was a Shia and a Sunni, and it didn't matter because we were brand new. And so this is how I only knew about Islam at that time. Yeah.
Wow. I thought we were going to have a riveting conversation about the fact that, you grew up in a place where there weren't so many Pakistanis.
There were none.
But I'd never realized the texture and the detail of sort of everything. And this is why conversations like this are so important, because I would have never known, even though I should have known. Wow. I want to explore this from another angle. One of the things that you said was, you had the privilege of going to Pakistan once a year over summer and meet your family, maternal family, paternal family. Talk to me a little bit about what that did to you when you were young. So, did you, were you just a kid and enjoying and having a blast in Pakistan? Did you feel like, your identity began to pull you a little bit more, where you felt like, hey, I'm in America and I feel more brown than white or American? I don't know if you felt that way or not. And then when you came in Pakistan, you're like, I'm too white for this. Like, did your cousins feel like you're too American or not? There was this stereotype of ABCD. I don't know if you recall this, but it's called American Born
Here.
Confused AC. But tell me a little bit about what that was like when you went to Pakistan versus when you were here, and was there a push and pull there?
Um, yeah, so when I would travel to Pakistan, I'm the eldest of four children, and so I
Mm-hmm.
remember it from, very young and going more frequently than my siblings go now. And I just remember that it was just very different. First of all, the long plane rides and seeing different
Mm-hmm.
places, which my friends never did. Most people in New Orleans don't get on a
Mm-hmm.
plane. For them, vacation is going to
Mm-hmm.
Texas or Florida to the beach. And when I would say I would travel the world, they're like, well, why would you want to do that? Like, why would you go that far?
Mm-hmm.
Where is that? And so I was asked a lot of questions. I felt different because I would ask my
Mm-hmm.
parents, well, why can't we go to Florida? Why do we have to go so far? Because again, I was always very different. Realizing now that those opportunities are what people dream of. And I was not only able to go to Pakistan, but I was able to travel to Europe on the way to Pakistan, or able to travel to Asia on the way back from Pakistan. So I got to see the
Mm-hmm.
world. And so I am truly grateful, and it helped shape who I am now. And the opportunities, I realized how extraordinary they were. And the travel that I did in childhood can't even match the travel that I do now. And I do a lot of travel now, but that was a different
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so when we would land in Pakistan, my family on both sides are generally city dwellers. So I didn't really have to go to a village. So that, in that sense, it made it easier. We could land, go straight from the
Mm-hmm.
airport to someone's house. And, what people, the ideas or questions that people had for me about Pakistan, about whether we swing from tree to tree, whether how do we go from place to place? Like, do you have cars? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, do you have
Mm-hmm.
electricity? And so the fact that I was able to go into very palatial homes and have, gardens and
Mm-hmm.
jasmine gardens and, tea in the
Mm-hmm.
garden, and have to have all these amazing opportunities, I just didn't know how to explain that to people. At that time, there was
Mm-hmm.
no iPhone where I could go record everything and say, "Hey, this is what it really
Yeah.
looks like." It was only my
Mm-hmm.
my view of it, and even cameras at that time. Yeah, I could show them a few pictures, but obviously, it didn't
Yeah.
do it justice how we would come in and how the way I was greeted and treated. And of course, on both sides, we have big families, and on my mother's side, most of my cousins would all be there, and so I have six aunts and, two mamus. And so all of them would be there. So I was able to engage with my cousins, and most of them did not live abroad. Most of them were born and raised in Pakistan, but they all speak English normally. And so that was not a problem. And so it's just my
Mm-hmm.
accent was a little different for them. And yeah, they would ridicule. Sometimes they would tell jokes, but I really enjoyed being part of a large family, and being able to hang out with my cousins and to sort of explore my Pakistani side, something that I didn't have the opportunity because I didn't have any Pakistani friends in New Orleans, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were no
Mm-hmm.
girls or boys my age, and so it was good to have people my own age who were Pakistani that I could relate to and go different places and just hang out. And I mean, I always kind of wanted to come back, but because I realized it was different, but I just kept observing the streets. I kept observing the people and wondering, why is it so different? Like, why do we have all
Mm-hmm.
these opportunities in the United States? They don't. Like, what makes sense? I was born
Mm-hmm.
in the same place. Why did I
Yeah.
get to go there? Like, why? I just kept
Mm-hmm.
asking, wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sort of helped shape my understanding and my desire to focus on international development and to look at developing countries and try to sort of shape the U.S. or international foreign assistance, international donors, to see and understand the differences between developing world and the developed world. So that was my attempt, and that's why I studied that in college.
Wow. What a fascinating journey, sort of back home and through time. The fact that you said, we didn't have iPhones back then, to show our friends, which is such an obvious statement. And I've grown in a time before iPhones or even phones. But, you know, just to imagine, like, you would have to use your words as a little kid to explain like what life was like back in Pakistan when there are so many preconceived notions. It's just so fascinating, and shows how much more difficult it was to be able to talk about identity and have that burden as a child. um, One thing now, I wanna come to sort of your high school years. So, when we're a child, other people define us, but when we start sort of enter middle school, high school, we try to define ourselves. When you were, in the process of defining yourself, did you feel like you wanted to downplay any part of your identity, or was there any identity conflict at that point in time, or you were just a high schooler and having a time of your life and not thinking about any of these things at that time?
No, high school presented some challenges, first of all, because I'm a female and I'm a Muslim female. And my
Mm-hmm.
parents, as I said, I'm the eldest of 4 children. And as immigrants,
Mm-hmm.
my parents didn't know they had heard all these things about American high schools, drugs, rock and roll, alcohol, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And New Orleans being a city that is known for fun and lots of debauchery, they were a
Mm-hmm.
little even more skeptical. And so they told
Mm-hmm.
me in the 7th grade that I would be going to Pakistan for high school. And
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
and I would be living with my father. And I said, no, I can't do that. I mean, like, I don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't pick up and go to Pakistan for
Mm-hmm.
high school because I don't know anyone. I still feel comfortable going there.
Mm-hmm.
And why would I do that? And so it was like a
Mm-hmm.
big issue because I went to I would say coeducational school, but in
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans, because of the predominant Catholic tradition, in the education system not being that good, most people send their children to Catholic schools or private schools, and there's a tradition
Mm-hmm.
of gender segregation. Okay, in Catholic and private
Mm-hmm.
schools, but just so happened that the
Mm-hmm.
elementary school and middle school I went to was co-ed, and so they were a little afraid, and they said, look at the solution for that. And then the other schools were Catholic, okay, and so they didn't want me
Mm-hmm.
to go to a Christian school or a Catholic school. I will tell you about this later, that they changed their mind about this, but about just the religion aspect. So
Mm-hmm.
finally,
Mm-hmm.
I said, no, I'm just not going to go. This is ridiculous. And so they found a
Wow.
very small elite girls' school that was non-denominational. So it was private, and
Mm.
it wasn't associated with the Catholic Church. So then they said I have to go to this school, and I really did not want to go to the school. First of all, it was very far away. It was completely different. Again, it was all white, and the girls were at a different they just lived in a different world. They were all debutantes,
Mm-hmm.
and they had what
Mm-hmm.
we call a high society in which they only married each other. And
Mm-hmm.
so to have someone externally and someone who wasn't part of their background, I knew I would face a lot of challenges. And I said, no, I want to go to this Catholic school where all my other friends are going from the elementary school. And I named several schools. And no, you cannot go to a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up having to go to this. It was either the private school or Pakistan. So I chose a private school in New Orleans. So that's where I ended up. And
What was that like at grade 7? Did you like, wow? And to have the confidence and the courage to say, no, I'm not gonna do it. And Pakistani parents, there's a lot of reverence. It's very complicated relationships with parents, and to do that as a girl at that age, um did it make you resent your Pakistani identity or religious identity at that moment, or was it just like, I need to save myself and stay
I need
here
to
in the
save myself and
US?
stay here because at 7th and 8th grade, I started to develop an interest in government and politics.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, math and science were kept being pushed down my throat, because that's what my family is all about, scientists. And I really hated math and science, and I did actually very poorly in them. I did not do well, and I
Mm-hmm.
really struggled, and I really excelled in history and government and politics. And I knew that was, I had to sort of, I had to continue, but why would I have to be shipped away somewhere so far away, which I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't understand. I didn't even really speak Urdu that much. I mean, I could
Mm-hmm.
understand it, but with the ABCD that I am, my accent
Mm-hmm.
is ridiculed, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, even if I would go to a store and I would speak, or they would respond to me in English, because,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was like, no, I'm going to be made fun of there. I'm going to be ridiculed. I
Mm-hmm.
know that I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
to have friends
Mm-hmm.
there either. So why would I be
Mm-hmm.
thrown into some other place where, again, I have to start over and start my journey of acclimating and integrating, because I
Mm-hmm.
know that that would be difficult too. And I was just finding a footing
Wow.
in, like, saying, and, because of our Constitution and the United States giving rights to everyone, I started to realize that I could make a place here because the
Mm-hmm.
law guarantees it. And so just because it's not true of New Orleans, Louisiana, doesn't mean it's not true of the
Yeah.
United States of America. So that's when I
Mm-hmm.
started to, advocate for myself. And that's when I decided I think I want to
Wow.
be a lawyer.
Wow. We're gonna pick on some of these threads, but there's one more question it's just such a, I can imagine it being such a formative moment in your life where, you hear these stories, but you don't realize it's gonna happen to somebody you know, or has happened to somebody you know. Because I know you as an adult, I would have never imagined sort of, your parents being like, okay, at high school, go to Pakistan, but and that too at high school. I could understand college, but high school, okay. Uh, have you, like, now that you look back on that moment, like, did you have a moment of reckoning with your parents later where you were like, what were you thinking? Or do you not think about it now? Do you guys joke about it now? Like, how do you view back, like, now? How do you look at that time and that decision in that moment? Because you told me pretty casually, and I lost my mind when you told me, but it was pretty casual for you now.
Yeah, it is. I just accepted it because I knew I wasn't going to do it. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, what are they going to do? Just force me? And I think they just were uncertain. They just didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. Right. And
Yeah.
because unlike the luxury that people have now in these generations, we didn't have any Muslim Americans or Pakistani Americans at that time that were living, and that they didn't know
Mm-hmm.
anyone that had gone through high school in the United States. So right now, there's
Mm-hmm.
whole networks of people. They can look to their neighbors, and they can look to their community. They can look all over the United States and the Western world and see how people have acclimated and
Mm-hmm.
excelled. But at that time,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't know anyone that had, so they were
Mm-hmm.
scared. They didn't know who I was
Mm-hmm.
going to become, right? I mean, my parents are
Mm-hmm.
not very strict. I'm allowed to wear whatever I want. I'm allowed to
Mm-hmm.
go wherever I want. But at that time, they just did not know what American high schools were like. And all they could relate to is what they saw on TV. And
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans, being the way that it is, a big drinking city, they were very nervous. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that was their knee-jerk reaction, just to protect me. Later on in life, I realized that there is much more available in Pakistan than I ever experienced in high school in the United States, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
would tell them that. I
Mm-hmm.
said, later on when I went after my undergraduate degree and was able to interact with many Pakistanis, people that I had gone to college with here, and I had said, you wanted to send me to Pakistan, but the activities the Pakistanis are up to in Pakistan are much greater than what
Mm-hmm.
I saw in high school in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. And so then they realized, yes. But it was only because I was the eldest of four that they did not know. And so this
Yeah.
was their reaction. Later on, my siblings, my brother went to the brother that's right 3 years behind me went to a Catholic school. And then my sister and brother
Mm-hmm.
went to a predominantly Jewish school. So, and both
Mm-hmm.
coeducational. So it was just because I was the eldest child and a girl, and they just did not know how to react. And then as they
Yeah.
saw, and my younger siblings, that they had other Pakistani Muslims and others in their classes, and so they felt more comfortable with them in those schools, that there was at least someone there as an ally for them, or a friend or someone that they could go to. So they felt more comfortable with them because there was another person there. But for me, because there was no one my age, or and so I was be alone in all of these places, so they just thought it would maybe easier. So I think it was just
Yeah.
not knowing at that. So I accepted
Yeah.
it and moved on. It's just maybe I would have done
Yeah.
the same. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. All right. I want to move to then we moved from high school to undergrad. Talk to me a little bit about where you studied, how that shaped you, both from a career journey and what you wanted to do with your life. from a work standpoint, and also how it continued to evolve your identity over time?
Sure. So as I mentioned, it was starting in eighth grade that I had an interest in history and government and politics. And so when I went to this small school, I was able to, it was a much smaller environment. And because it allowed me to interact with my teachers, and the teachers there had come from other universities. They were actually professors. They were not just, master students, and they had taught at universities around the country, so they were not from New Orleans. And they really harnessed that interest in government and politics and encouraged me to go beyond. And I realized that I didn't look like anyone in the city. I didn't think like anyone in the city, so I have to get out of the city. So that was my notion starting in 10th grade. So I organized, and because we had never been to Washington, as I mentioned, we took trips around the world, but never really saw much of the domestic United States. So I told my parents we're organizing a spring break trip to Washington. So we're going to visit. And so I was the most excited. I was planning all the places, and for me to go to the Lincoln Memorial and go to see John F. Kennedy's memorial and see, the quotes and to see, I was just fascinated. And I felt like this is my country. It really is my country. I do belong here because of all the rights of, all the statements about human rights and belonging and, freeing slaves and looking at people of color. And then I saw the diversity in Washington and I thought, this is where I have to come. And so also part of that trip was, as I mentioned, because of this, since I wasn't going to be a doctor or a scientist or an engineer, I had to pick a profession. And so in order for me to have my parents trust me that I was going to do something different, I said, I'm going to be a lawyer, and I have to go check out these law schools, and we have to take the PSATs and the SATs. So I didn't have any help. I had to do all of this because my parents did not go through this, and I didn't, as I said, have any mentors in my family that were into this. I would just do all of this stuff by myself, and I talked to my teachers, and there was actually a girl in my class. I still remember her sitting at the lockers one day. Her name is Catherine Cooper, and she told me, there's a school in Washington. You would really belong there. I said, what school is that? She said, the American University. I'm like, what? But they're all American universities. She's like, no, there's a specific school in Washington. And I had no idea. So that was on my list, Georgetown, all George Washington, all the major schools. And so we made campus tours, and that's how I did it. And lo and behold, I got accepted as a junior in high school to take advanced college classes at American University in foreign policy. It was I obtained, I earned college credit junior year. And so I came here, and my parents were scared to death. So my mom came and found a relative somewhere nearby, and she stayed for 2 weeks while I did some classes. And then after 2 weeks, she left. But I was like, I'm staying in the dorm. I am not staying with you. I have to stay here. And to be honest, when I got to the dorm, I cried because I thought, what did I get myself into? All these people, I've never been in a sea of all these people of different people from different races, different religions. New Orleans is so small compared to this. And I just looked around like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I don't know anybody here. And then I wanted to run back, and I was about to call my mom. And then I thought, no, you fought to get here. You can't go crying home. You said you wanted to do this, so you better stick to your guns and do it. So I had to do it. And that's when I started to be bold and brave and decide that I was going to come to Washington for college and university. And study politics and study international relations and develop who I've become.
Yeah. It's so, that's a common thread that we're seeing in a lot of sort of guests on this podcast, which is there are always two battles, one that's external and one that's internal, especially with the Pakistani American women that I've interviewed. It's so interesting because one is, you're a young child, you're now for the first time out there in the world, and there are all these people in the dorm from all over the world, and there's a natural intimidation. But at the same time, whereas another kid would run into the arms of their parents and be like, take me back, or just have a moment of weakness. There's also a moment of strength that you need to put, internally as well, and say, no, I want to do this, so that they don't waver and say, okay, see, we told you, come back. And I'm simplifying the narrative here a little bit, but it's extra hard, to do that, and then to be a trailblazer again, to be the first person to do that in a family or in a community, and
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of
yeah. And
respect.
so at that time, I realized that I do have to come to Washington for college because New Orleans, I mean, even though there are great schools there,
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't belong. And I was restricted. I couldn't date. I couldn't go places. Not that that was like the priority, but I was not a normal American teenager. I did not know what the world was like. And so in order to truly be integrated, I needed to get away and I needed to pursue these things. Now, part of me was scared, like I was scared to death to do all of this stuff. And I see many young Pakistani Americans, Muslims, and I mention many of them, that they stay in their communities and they go to college and universities in their hometown, and they thrive. And then later on, when they're looking at opportunities for work and things, then they start to like say, okay, I'm going to venture out. But they've had a very sheltered life. And so the type of tips and things that I give them, it seems like they are just learning, they're starting their journey after they graduate, after they've either finished their undergraduate or their master's program. And so it does become a little bit difficult. And then some people just never leave their hometown, right? A lot of people grow up and stay in their hometown and are fine doing so. But just because I grew up in a place that I knew I did not fit in, I knew I had to get out of there. And it was very, I'm going to be honest, it was very lonely. A lot of times I felt like I did not belong because I still kept my Muslim and Pakistani values no matter where I went. And it didn't always mesh with everyone else's. And so it does make you feel isolated at times. And so I think generations now are very lucky to have that sort of, have those options where they can meet people of similar backgrounds or similar cultural identity and religious identity that would help them integrate a little bit more into American society.
Yeah, fascinating. So continuing to walk that thread, and you studying now in Washington, at what point did you realize that foreign policy or sort of this space, diplomacy, is a space that you're vibing towards and something where you want to sort of spend the bulk of your career in? Was it something that was clear? And also sort of the push and pull between law and this, like talk to us about the journey of how you went from that space to the State Department eventually. Like, what was that journey like from a career
Oh, I
arc
never
standpoint?
imagined that I would work for the State Department. I never had a desire to be a diplomat. Some people do from day one. My journey was more about, as I mentioned, helping people in the developing world. So I focused on international development. So that's why American University was better for me. That's why I sought that as opposed to Georgetown, which has a School of Foreign Service, because I was not actually interested in working for the government. I never had a desire to be a diplomat. My goal was to help countries like Pakistan, right? To help to go back and to make my journey here valuable and how we could benefit developing countries. So whether that was in Africa, Latin America, I knew that if I just focused on Pakistan, I would be, sort of boxed into this, or South Asia, so I knew that I had to study the world in order to be marketable, to get jobs, because to be honest, at that time, no one really cared about South Asia. No one really was, interested in South Asia or most of the Muslim world. And in fact, when I was an undergrad and I decided to study Middle East policy, people told me, do you think you're going to have a job there? Because, most people are not really focused on that. And so I said, okay, but that's really, I tried Latin America. I took courses on Africa, but I think I resonate more with this region than any other. And so, and I said, well, South Asia, I've already known it, but I need to study something that's closer. And so to have my credentials.
Yeah.
So I took a leap of faith and believed in myself and said, this is what I'm going to do. And along with that, because of my interest in politics, and in Louisiana, the only way to get involved in government is to be involved in politics, I joined the different clubs like Young Republicans, Young Democrats. I participated in political mock debates. So I was really involved in U.S. government as well and worked at the local level. I was a delegate from the state of Louisiana to one of the conventions as,
Oh, wow.
a senior in high school. And then I continued that in college. But then when I realized with all the fraternities and sororities and those people were involved in American politics, I felt, again, a little bit different, right? I felt like, again, this is a clash of values because fraternity and sorority parties are well known and this is not who I am. And so then I started to and then I was lucky that American University had a very diverse international population. And my best friend at that time turned out to be from the Caribbean, half French, half Caribbean, from Trinidad and Tobago. So it was a very interesting experience. And then I joined all the international clubs and I was hanging out with every group possible. I really took advantage of the diversity at American University and enjoyed every minute of it. And when I graduated in international development with a focus on Middle East policy. And so with that, and I focused on human rights, and I did some internships at Amnesty International. And when I was at Amnesty International, I had the opportunity to meet Pakistan's premier human rights advocate, Asma Jahangir. And I realized at that time that I really wanted to focus on women's rights in Pakistan. And, you know, although I had promised my parents I was going straight to law school, that was the only reason I was in Washington. The only reason I was allowed to come to Washington against my dadi and nani's, like, you know, advice, like, you shouldn't be sending a girl so far away from home. It was all based on the fact that I was going to become a lawyer. I told my parents, well, I can't go to law school straight away. And they're like, what? You have to take the LSAT. You have to get into law school. Otherwise, you're going to be a failure in life. And what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Just go around to protest around the world to be a human rights advocate? That's not going to work. Like, you're not going to be able to support yourself, and we're not going to support you do that. So I thought, okay, what do we do here now? So it was really
very typically Pakistan dramatic family conversations.
Yes. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take the LSAT, but I have to go to Pakistan. And they're like, why? And in between, because I'd studied Middle East policy, I decided to apply to the American University of Cairo and wanted to study Arabic in Cairo. And they're like, absolutely. And I got admitted. And they're like, you're not going to Cairo to study Arabic. I'm like, but this is very important for me. Nope, they would not let me go. And so the compromise was I could go to Pakistan for like 6 months, and I was working for lawyers. So here I, you know, worked night and day to find some connections and to work for a law firm. And I was able to work for a very prominent corporate law firm in Lahore. So that made my family feel better, that it was a real legit office where, you know, I go and they actually had to go check out the office to make sure it was a legit office, that I was working there. And, you know, people were very professional. So fine, I was allowed to do that. So I did that. But then, you know, outside this beautiful office on Mall Road, Lahore, you know, I was living in my hala. I had a driver. And so, but it was a very sanitized life again. You know, the driver would drop me off. I would go up in this elevator, and it was all mahogany tables, and I would have people give me tea in the morning and, you know, welcome me and say, you know, how lucky you are to work for this law firm. Everyone here is a Harvard graduate or, you know, Oxford graduate, and we don't usually take interns, but you're very lucky to work here. And then they paid me something too. So I said, I guess I have some good connections, some good wasta. So I guess that's why I'm here. I don't know. So I wanted to type things myself, and they're like, no, you cannot go to the computer. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they're like, no, we have typists here. I'm like, how does one work without a computer? Like, I had a very different, I'm like, and so I decided I was going to go into this room where it was all men, and they're like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to come and type my own briefs because I can't sit at my desk and dictate like you all do. I hadn't need a computer. So they were horrified that me as a young woman would go into this office of all men who were not as educated as I am, or like, you know, and then, you know, be in this room and with them and like decide to type my own briefs. And so anyway, I realized that even this corporate law firm, as educated and experienced as they are living in the West, was still very behind the times. And so I said, this is not why I came to Pakistan. And so I kept looking at the trash outside the building, and I kept seeing the children, and I would just stare out the window because there wasn't, again, how many times can I break the barrier and go into the typist rooms?
Yeah.
So I would look out the window, and I would see the kids like constantly eating from the trash. And I would constantly look to see there are no parents. There are nobody here to stop them.
Yeah.
There's nobody there. And I said, you know what? I didn't come here to sit in this office, in this beautiful office. I could be doing this in the United States of America, right? And it was hot as hell outside. But I decided, I went to the head of the law firm, and I said, sir, thank you for this great opportunity, but I need to go somewhere else. I need to get real and see the real Pakistan. And he's like, do you know how many people like are dying to work for this firm? And I said, I know, sir. And I really appreciate the opportunity, but this opportunity would, I could have in the United States. I came to Pakistan for a reason, and I decided to go. And I said, I really want to work for Asma Jahangir. He goes, I know her very well. He picked up the phone and he called her right away. And he said, I have an amazing girl. He just said, we don't really take interns. He's like, that's fine. I would like you to meet her. And I met her, and I decided to go work at lower courts, session courts, and I worked with Asma Jahangir for the next 6 months. And I went to prisons. I went to Abi Allah jail in Islamabad. I went to Kot Lakhpat Lahore, and I then worked on women's rights cases throughout Pakistan on Zina and the Hudud ordinances, which were discriminating women against rape and putting them in jail for unfair practices of adultery and all sorts of other things. And then I went to women's shelters. So then I got to see the real Pakistan.
Wow, I had no idea that you worked with Asma Jahangir and were doing sort of the real work of advocating for women who sort of are both helpless and voiceless at that stage once you're in sort of that system.
And I'd only met her for a few minutes at Amnesty International, but I was really taken by, the work of minorities. She was working at that time for a lot of Christian minorities that were unduly put into prison. And most of our focus is on women's rights. And so, yes, that's what I decided to do. And my family was horrified that I was going into prisons. And then I actually was documenting cases of women in prison. So I've been behind bars and interviewed people even in solitary confinement. And that's when my Urdu and Punjabi came in very
Wow. And Asma was such a force of nature. I can imagine the kind of, just being in her orbit and learning from that and getting inspired by that must have been very transformational. So what happened then? So you sort of got that experience, and then what did you do? Did you decide to stay on in Pakistan? Did you just come back?
All these things about Pakistan and believe that I belong to Pakistan, that's where I would thrive. Because everyone was like me and people accepted me, right? And people thought I was crazy, but why would I leave the United States to come? Everyone else is trying to come to the United States, and why would you leave? And I said, because this is really, I've had a nice life. I've been very fortunate, but this is really why I want to strike the balance of why we're the same. So at that point, my family started to push me back and say, no, you cannot stay there any longer. You need to come back home now. Enough is enough. You need to go into law school and continue the professional journey that you started. This is not what we signed up for, right? You need to come back.
I just want to point out an irony for a second, which is, when you were at your high school moment, they're like, go to Pakistan. And now you're in Pakistan a lot later. They're like, come back.
Come back.
You can't make Pakistani parents happy. Keep going.
That's correct. Thank you for pointing out the irony.
You can never make them happy.
They thought I would be living a sanitized life, not knowing who I am. And I have to attribute a lot of this confidence to the girls' school that I went. So even though I went there kicking and screaming to this elite girls' school, the opportunities that I received there, I realized later, I'll harness the fact it built confidence in me. So going to an all-girls school helped me build confidence, and it helped me excel in advocating for my own position. So rather than just following along and being very quiet, which I was in elementary school, I mean, I was, obviously always a bit talkative at home, but not in school. The girls' school really helped me. And it was only last year that they awarded me an alumna of the year or a decade or something in terms of my graduation, in terms of all of the achievements that I've made, in terms of supporting women's rights and supporting just sort of excelling in my career. So as much as I went there kicking and screaming, it did give me a lot of confidence, which I wouldn't have had without it. So that's why I was advocating for myself. And and so towards the end, Asma Jahangir said, we would like to nominate you to go to the UN Human Rights Conference in Oslo. And I was like jumping, like, oh my God, I get to go represent Pakistan, not the United States. I get to go represent Pakistan at the UN Human Rights Convention in Oslo. And of course, because I had an American passport, it was easy for me to go as opposed to the others. So it was an easy fix for them and everything was being paid for. But guess what? My parents said I couldn't go. And I said,
What?
yes.
Why? But at that point, you were an adult. Okay, tell me more.
I had graduated CUP, but I'm still a Pakistani female, right? And so they're like, no, you're going to be human rights advocate. You're not going to be a lawyer anymore. You're going to be a human rights advocate. And so, again, that's not going to pay the bills. And that's not, it's not a reputable profession. Not more the bills. I think it's not a reputable profession. What are you going to be doing? Just going to protests around the world? And so they doubted me. And so they said, well, if you go there, then forget about supporting you for law school or graduate school or anything. That's it. So I had a tough choice to make. Do I then isolate myself for the rest of my life? Or do I, say, okay, and maybe God will give me other opportunities. So I was still, I guess 22. I wasn't that much of an adult, right? Still hadn't gone to graduate school. So I knew I had to go to graduate school at least, even if I wasn't going to go. I needed to do something because I knew I had to be competitive. And even if I wanted to be at the UN or something, I needed to have a graduate degree. So I needed this at that time. So I was like, all right, I have to come back home. And then I came back home and I wasn't sure I wasn't going to stay in Louisiana. So I asked my friend who was in Washington and I went back to American University and I said, guess what? I know I've been accepted into law school somewhere else, but I'm going to study foreign policy and international relations, and I'm going to focus on South Asia because I need to go back to Pakistan. This is only temporary. I'm only here to get a graduate degree to make sure that I can pay my own bills and do all my own stuff. I have to go back to Pakistan. And I want the program. So they said, you can take classes. I worked day and night. I stayed with my friend. I told my parents, I'm doing my own thing. Don't worry about me. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I did. Then they helped me, obviously, later on. And I started taking classes even before I got accepted into a graduate program. I excelled. I worked day and night. And I got accepted into the program. I took courses. I designed my own graduate program in communications. Communications and international development focus on gender policy, then realizing later that maybe I need a little bit more technical skills, and then also started to do an MPH, a Master's in Public Health, at night at George Washington. So I was going between American University, George Washington, had designed my own master's degree, and with the notion of within 2 years, I have to go back to Pakistan. And that's exactly what I did. And I took courses everywhere I worked, and I decided that after 2 years, I'm going to do my master's thesis in Pakistan. We could have done secondary research. I decided to do primary research, which was similar to PhD research. And I designed courses, and I wrote to all these people. In one of the places that I was working, one of the women had just come back. One of my colleagues at that time had come back from working in Pakistan for the World Bank. And when I told her about, because I was doing research with immigrant populations in Washington, so she said, if this is really what you want to do, I know someone at UNICEF. I'm like, UNICEF in Pakistan? She said, yeah. And at that time, again, snail mail or like very slow email at that time. Again, no iPhones, no instant link connections, no opportunities to find someone on Instagram or check out their things and connect with them. Yeah. This was the old days where literally I had to have someone call someone. I sent an email, sent a letter. You had to double track everything at that time, especially in Pakistan, because in Pakistan people still everyone didn't have their own email address at that time. So anyway, long story short, I got UNICEF funded my master's research. My first job was with the United Nations, with UNICEF in Lahore, Pakistan, the place where I was born. And that's when my family finally realized that Saira Saeed actually can do what she sets out to do.
Wow, your life came full circle in such a Such a crazy way, and what a journey it took to sort of just get there. Wow. And did you feel like after you had proven yourself to your parents, did they then let go and finally let you be an adult, or did they still sort of keep coming
Nope.
back?
That was finally because, the sort of exceptional opportunities that I received and the fact that the rest of my family felt they were all shocked that I would get my first job. And at 24 years old, to get your first job with the United Nations is a big deal.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone was extremely like, yeah, this is, and so because I forfeited going to law school, I deferred for 1 year, and then I decided I wasn't going to go. They really thought
Mm-hmm.
they weren't sure what I was going to be, right? Because obviously professional
Yeah.
degrees are not only important for men in my family, but they're very important for women. So that's one good thing about my
Mm-hmm.
family, that we treat women and men equally in terms of everyone should be
Mm-hmm.
highly educated and, be able to participate in society. So that's one thing that I really appreciate, that they pushed me that, because a lot of people would have said, okay, if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. That's fine. Like just,
Mm-hmm.
hang around life. But no, they really
Mm-hmm.
pushed me to be a professional. And so that sort of
Yeah.
drive is what keeps me going today to continue to work, because I run into many females that say, oh yeah, I just want to get married and, be happy and have kids,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be fulfilling. But for me, that was
Mm-hmm.
never my journey. My journey was to make a contribution in society and to participate and to
Mm-hmm.
be active, because all of my family is that way.
Wow, what an extraordinary sort of journey and story. And the fact that you stuck to it, you didn't sort of say what you were told, you didn't do what you were told to do. Almost became the black sheep of the family, where everybody was like, we have no idea what she's doing or why she's doing it. And then sort of to prove them sort of full circle, it's an incredible sort of journey. And then this is only the beginning of your journey. It only got better from there, from a career track point of view. So tell us
Well, I just
sort of
want to
how
point out
you
something,
sort of
but
tell us the journey now.
I could have
Mm-hmm.
taken a different route, right? I could have said my family is
Mm-hmm.
not important and I can do this by myself and say goodbye, which, some people do as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or some people go the other way
Mm-hmm.
and just listen, right? And adhere to what
Mm-hmm.
they're supposed to do and then regret later. I tried to
Mm-hmm.
make it work. I tried to, so
Mm-hmm.
I took like some of the things where they told me you can't, I took it on. I said, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to adhere to what, because they're still my parents. And this is the culture that I was raised in.
Mm-hmm.
We're still supposed to
Mm-hmm.
respect your elders and especially your parents. So I just want to
Mm-hmm.
point that out, that there are things that
Mm-hmm.
I sacrificed, knowing that I could have done it, but then thinking that maybe later in life that it would be beneficial for me. And this is what I have found, right? Because I did not want to
Mm-hmm.
isolate them completely, because
Mm-hmm.
they raised me and this is the culture that I had belonged to, and I still have to respect them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
And yeah,
and so later, yes,
and that's
later
the
in life, so when I got, when I was in Pakistan and I left, I was in UNICEF, I was working in the Punjab province, as I said. I did a lot of training outside of Lahore. I went and monitored and evaluated UNICEF's programs in their health, education, and communications, to whether or not behavior change communications was making a difference, whether their funds were being supported and having an impact. And one of the lessons that I gave them or shared with them was that their programs that were just working with women by themselves were not being effective. And the sort of solution that I came up with was that you're not working with the entire family, particularly grandmothers or others in the household, that doing interventions just with the women themselves in Pakistani or, generally the Muslim societies does not work. They're decision makers throughout. And so they had a very Western approach to the way that they were creating communications products and things to translate health, basic maternal and child health. And so there was a drama at that time, you may remember, called but Atika Audho was one of her first dramas. And it was talking about reproductive health. And at that time, population control was very big in Pakistan. So they were trying to do it through like education dramas. It was called edutainment. So this idea of merging media, communications, public health, this is where I really saw it all happen in Pakistan. And I was fascinated by the topic. And so I decided to work when I came back, I decided this is what the area that I wanted to focus on. So this is what I pursued later.
Wow. The intersection of media and behavior change and communications. I mean, I'm a communications person by sort of profession as well, and sort of am a journalist and storyteller at heart. So I think that for me, this is like gold dust in terms of what excites me, and I'm a big nerd about it. But that's amazing. So once you realize that this is the space that sort of excites you, how did you translate it into your life's vocation? How did you say, okay, this is something that I'm gonna spend my life doing?
So after UNICEF, like, because it was content, I was not like, designated by the UN. I wasn't a UN diplomat. The contracts were limited and was just for the Punjab province. And again, I said, I'm here to learn about Pakistan, not just Punjab. So I decided to explore, and I got a job at the Asia Foundation, knowing that at one point I would have to come back to the United States. And so Asia Foundation had a big grant from USAID. And so again, I took a leap of faith, leaving my family and extended family in Lahore, where my family felt comfortable, to say, I'm moving to Islamabad. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, I'm moving to Islamabad, and I'm going to work in all 4 provinces of Pakistan. So I get to go to Sindh, Balochistan, NWFP at that time, now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, because I need to learn about all of Pakistan, not just Punjab. So I'm going. And they're like, but where are you going to live? What are you going to do? So exactly. So luckily, my mom and my uncle helped me, and I found a place, and he said, just don't tell your parents, we're going to take care of it. So then he supported me, and I found a place, and I lived in Islamabad in F71, and yeah, I started to work in all 4 provinces of Pakistan. So I was based in Islamabad, and every week I would go to a different province. So I've been to the Chaman border in Quetta. I've been to parts of Mardan, Gilgit, Baltistan. In between, I got job offers from the Aga Khan Foundation, and to work in Skardu and Gilgit. And I would travel to all those places. But in the end, there's one aspect of my journey which I've never talked about. And that I'm going to share here, because usually it's a health-related issue that came up for me when I was in high school. And it always, another reason why my family was a bit scared, but I knew that I had to do a lot of this stuff before, because it's a degenerative disease, a progressive disease. And so if I didn't do all these things when I was able, I wouldn't be able to do them later in life. So I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic when I was 12 years old. And I had to take insulin shots. And at first I tried with medication. And so this is another reason why my family was a little bit concerned. So this is why I understood at different points. And traveling all of these places, being a type 1 insulin diabetic, with my shots and my needles and all the stuff around, became very challenging. And I was admitted to the hospital several times along the way. And being in hospitals in Pakistan, when your family's in the United States, it's a little scary. And so, I was still determined to stay there. But then when some of my relatives saw me in the hospital and said, we don't know if she's going to make it, you better get her out of there. So kicking and screaming, I literally cried so bad the day in my office in Islamabad, because I was overlooking the Margala Hills, and I was doing what I wanted to do, bridging the gap between, I was working for an American organization on a USAID project in Pakistan in all 4 provinces. This is what I set out to do. God gave me this opportunity, and now I have to leave. I was devastated. And I still am. I would have stayed in Pakistan had it not been for my health. But I guess God had another plan for me, and all that studying that I did around the world sort of, made a difference. And so I had to come back to the United States, and I had to get my medical treatment here, and I had to get better. And in the end, I had to take safer jobs. I couldn't be roaming around to all these to all these rural places where water, electricity, and things were not available, because at any point, and the distances between rural health and getting into a hospital are very great in Pakistan. And so I had to sort of realize to myself that I cannot do what I set out to do. Like, I've done what I did, and so God gave me the opportunity. Alhamdulillah, I'm thankful for it, but I have to come back to a desk job. Actually, one of the first jobs I did get was on India, Jordan, and Nepal, working on public health communications again. So then I did travel, thankfully, with with great difficulty. I was able to travel to India, and I would travel to Jordan and Nepal, working with ministries of health and ministries of communication. So I was able to still continue that passion of mine of health, education, communications, but just from Washington. And so that gave me some great opportunities and expanded my horizon. Through that, I ended up working after many years working with international NGOs. I got a job at USAID directly as a contractor, and that gave me opportunities to work on research, evaluation, gender. And so I was a gender advisor for USAID for all of Asia and the Middle East. I was a research analyst.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and I was able to design monitoring and evaluation projects for all of the Middle East and Asia through our staff in USAID, and I conducted trainings. At one point, I was able to go to Thailand to bring all these people together, and a lot of this stuff I did on my own. I was very innovative. I remember while working at USAID, the United States went into Afghanistan, and we had at that time then. My experience in South Asia became very important, and I had an opportunity to work on the Afghanistan desk, and again, not only my communications, looking at photos and videos of Afghan women and bringing in ministries of education, ministries of communications, and I designed a strategic communications policy for the government of Afghanistan, bringing together journalists. So I've had some amazing opportunities. I was able to go to Afghanistan as well. Serve in our embassy in Kabul while working for USAID. All throughout this, I was a contractor. I was never a direct hire because I never wanted to work for the U.S. government. Remember, I told you I was interested in working for for the average person on the street in Pakistan. And so I never felt the U.S. government could really do that. And I thought that there were just people sitting in embassies and not really doing much work. And USAID, yes, a little bit. So I was able to work, but I was working for the implementing organizations. I was actually going into the villages or going on the ground. Yeah. And that was fine for me. But to make the leap to the government, I never would dream of it. But it was when I started to work for the international NGOs that I realized that they are really beholden to these organizations, and they rely on them for direction, for policy. And yes, they're experts on the ground, but they still have to adhere to U.S. policy. So really to make a difference, to have an impact, you've got to influence policy. So, and because there was always barriers to even speak to people at USAID or the State Department, because there were so many layers, and I was still only in my 30s. So I was like, okay, still I was not considered like a specialist or someone that, they would listen to. I decided, okay, I'm going to try for government. And I was working as a contractor, one of the offices. I explained my story to one of the directors there. She said, we have a couple of openings, you should apply. I said, no, I don't want to work for the State Department. No, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. But I'm going back to work on South Asia.
Thank you. No, thank you.
But I'm going back. And she's like, are you nuts? Like, she didn't say that, but she looked at me like, I'm like giving you an opportunity. And I'm like, but I'm focused on development. So she's like, okay. And then she later, as government bureaucracy works, a year later, a job comes out. And my parents were like, you should really apply for it. I said, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I want to focus on South Asia. Long story short, I applied, I got the job. And 17 years later, I'm a United States diplomat focused on the Middle East and North Africa. The opportunity was in the Middle East. And I have traveled to every country in the Middle East and North Africa except Iraq and Egypt. But in the end, I wanted to go to Egypt. And I can't imagine it. So now, I'm able to go for short trips. Throughout this journey, my health has continued to be an issue. So after serving in the U.S., I'm a civil servant, but I have had the opportunity to be involved in many foreign service excursions, but I've also been a foreign service officer. I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Abu Dhabi, the U.S. Embassy in Tunisia, during the revolution, the U.S. Embassy in Jordan. And in that process, as I said, my health was an issue. So after I came back from the U.S. Embassy, Abu Dhabi, my health really declined. It wasn't because of Abu Dhabi. They have amazing health care. It is just God's will at that time. And I went into end-stage renal failure. I was really in dire straits at that time. And I had to have a kidney and pancreas transplant 5 years ago next week. And so because of that, I'm an immune-compromised patient now, especially after COVID. And so this, along with it, is something that I have to deal with. And so my journey of doing what I wanted to do and being a trailblazer has had its obstacles because of my health. So I try to take it all in stride. And now, as I mentioned, I'm going to serve in the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait in a few weeks. As our public affairs officer, the head of all of our public affairs, press and public diplomacy. And I've been there many times, but I'm grateful to God for these opportunities. And inshallah, I hope that my health will allow me to continue to strive.
Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing about your health challenges and giving us the privilege of this podcast being the place where you've shared some of this. Your journey was extraordinary, which is why, we wanted to chat with you and learn, but we didn't know about the health challenges either. And if you put it in context of that, even without the health challenges, it's such an extraordinary story. But when you add that on top, when you're, at the Chaman border and you have the sort of challenges that you have, the amount of courage that it takes, the amount of energy that it takes, it's extraordinary. And even, you contextualize the concern that your parents have also from a different lens. And you're like, that comes out as well. But one of the most amazing things about you that you said sort of a few minutes ago was, there are two decision points that happen when your parents tell you to do something and you don't do it. One is you just stop listening to them entirely and do whatever the hell you want. The other is you listen to everything that they're doing, everything that they're saying, and just, follow what they're doing. And then there was the path that you took, which is listening to them, respecting them, doing what you agree with, but then charting your own path in terms of what you want to do to maintain your relationship with your parents. And, when we were even chatting about this podcast over the last couple of weeks, when I called you, you were actually with your family. Even, tomorrow your khala's coming over. So it seems like it's worked out. Like you have a strong relationship with your family and you have an incredibly thriving career where you're making an impact, and going to locations, that you've always wanted to serve in, studying something that at the time everybody was like, why the hell are you studying this? But now it's sort of the focal point of where the world turns from. And, how does it feel now that you sort of look back at all of these threads sort of coming full circle where they are? How do you feel when you reflect back now?
I still can't believe it. I really can't believe the journey that I've had. I truly believe God is great and that I would have never imagined it. The girl that stood up, to work for us in Jahangir, the girl that went to the prisons, and to end up being a United States diplomat, a woman of color in a place where it was usually white men who are representing the United States abroad, to be an officer serving. I am a very proud American. I'm a very proud diplomat. I'm a very proud Muslim and a very proud Pakistani woman. And sometimes, I go to it because my focus is the Middle East. It has been for almost 20 years. Sometimes people look at me like, are you sure this is the American representative here? But every day I meet with groups because I'm in public diplomacy. I frequently meet with visitors to the United States that come here. I brief them on all sorts of topics, from education to climate change to trade policy. And I have to read up on these things. So even though I studied public health and communications and education, because I'm a diplomat, and I have to be a jack of all trades in terms of speaking about U.S. policy, in terms of all of these things. and represent them. And so it's sometimes meeting with students, sometimes meeting with government officials, and I really have to know my audience, right? So that advocacy that I learned with my family, that advocacy of these cultural practices that I grew up with have come in very beneficial. Because when I go to the Middle East and when I interact with them, I understand the challenges that those girls face that are now at the King Abdulaziz University of Science and Technology and are trying to chart their path and trying to convince their parents that they can leave their home in Riyadh or rural Saudi Arabia to go to this amazing university, or the girls in Pakistan that want to go to LUMS, the Lahore University of Management and Sciences. I tell my story and they can relate, and I understand their story and I understand their challenges. And some of them come up to me, even a girl just yesterday from Saudi Arabia came up to me and said, her name is Aisha, and she said, thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank you for telling your story. Because I tell everyone, I lived in Pehchaan, Saudi Arabia, I lived in Pakistan, I lived all these places, and I had very strict parents, just like you. But if you're determined, you can do it. And you can still find a way to bridge all of our cultural, religious expectations while still being an advocate for yourself and for actively participating in society and pursuing your professional and personal goals.
Wow. That's, so incredible and so authentic when you can share your own journey with, a girl in another country who's sort of struggling with the same challenges that you sort of struggled with and overcame. One thing you said, which was going to be a part of my question about, being a brown woman, at the State Department and being a Pakistani American, like, how does it help and hurt? But one of the things that you said was, right now you said, when you show up at some places and they're like, oh, is she the American representative here? Like, is she going to represent the U.S.? Talk to me a little bit about that, about how that plays both to your advantage, to America's advantage, and also does it hurt sometimes when somebody's like, oh, you? Like, do they do a double take? Like, talk to us a little bit about what that moment is like, and does it still happen or has it gotten better?
So here in Washington, it's kind of accepted now because they obviously are diplomats that are from around the world, even foreign diplomats that come here and groups that come here. Usually they're briefed on who I am before they've received my bio. So I'm usually like, I do a lot of public speaking, and so I'm speaking to a large group. So they already know my educational and professional background. So they are really, excited and they accept it. But it's when I go overseas primarily, or if I'm in a reception with all foreign diplomats, they don't, sometimes even my own colleagues don't realize I'm American, right, until I open my mouth. So one thing that I tend to do, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, is just accentuate my American accent and speak and make sure I speak. Because if I was that same quiet girl that was in elementary school, they wouldn't realize that I'm the American representative. So I make sure, and sometimes it's not culturally appropriate, like they look at me like, why are you coming up? Because it's usually all men. Very few women are in these scenarios. Even so much so when I was in U.S. Embassy Abu Dhabi and I was part of a very small management team with the ambassador, I was the only woman, not only the only woman of color, but the only woman sitting in very high-level management meetings sometimes. And so again, that's accepted in the United States, but I distinctly remember that one of my senior officials, when I was being assigned to the embassy in Abu Dhabi as a foreign service officer, someone had said that, are you sure you want to send Saira to Abu Dhabi? Because there's a lot of discrimination against South Asians, and we might not be that effective. And so my director went respectfully to the Deputy Assistant Secretary and said, we are the United States of America. We're the Department of State. We cannot discriminate based on color, ethnic, religion, or origin. And she has the credentials to serve, so we have to send her. The person that made the comment was a political appointee, so may not be as well versed about what you can and cannot say or is acceptable. So that director of mine pushed for me to go. And honestly, I never felt any discrimination in Abu Dhabi or then, because I guess I project myself. And as
Yeah.
some of my Emirati colleagues have said, what you see is not what you get. So, again, being very vocal and participating, making sure I have a seat at the table. There was a time, Bilal, when I was a contractor, that I was told I could not sit at the table with other U.S. government employees, that I had to sit on the
Wow.
sidelines. So that discrimination that I faced in Louisiana, when I faced it within the U.S. government building, I was horrified. And that's why I didn't want to join the U.S. government. But later on, I learned that those were just some perceptions that people have. And there's still a class and rank system that, again, you have to advocate for yourself every day. I mean, wherever we go, there's discrimination in this world, no matter what field you're in, what situation you're in. And it's sad, but it's something that I feel like if you advocate for yourself and make sure that, you make it a point to express your views and your values, that someone will listen.
Yeah. In some strange way, the experience of your mom being called into your principal's office to explain what Pakistan and Islam is kind of the soundtrack of your life in terms of, being in different rooms, having people chat, having people ask you to sit here versus there. But the audacity of you to keep showing up, to persist in sort of doing what you want to do, I think has what's allowed you to come at the other side of it and to say that, hey, I am going to be in this room, I am going to be on this table, and I am going to make my voice heard. And I remember the first time we met was at an American Pakistan Foundation sort of meeting. I'm not sure if it was at Shamaila's house or at an event, but I remember the projection of your voice, and I was like, wow, she's got a voice like to reckon with in terms of, I don't know if it was the accent, but it was the power of what you were saying and how you were saying it, and with the credibility and aura with which you were saying it, and it was noticeable. And now that you say it, it's how you register the fact that you're an American and somebody of substance and weight, simply because we view one skin color as having natural weight and others have to get their weight. I mean, it's a story at so many levels.
Yes, and it's the skin color too that from day one where I've been discriminated against, right? And I would think that even going to other countries of the Middle East or something that I wouldn't be, because we look just like them, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, when they find out that you were born in Pakistan or you're Pakistani, and I've discussed this too, having lived in the Gulf significantly, even when I travel to places where there are discrimination, I have been discriminated, even as a U.S. diplomat. I tell them I would like a U.S. expedite. I want an expediter. Because of my country of origin, because I'm not a U.S. born. I'm not U.S. born. I'm a naturalized citizen, and a naturalized citizen of color. I need assistance because sometimes they question my diplomatic credentials, and I do not want to sit in secondary screening for hours and hours in an airport in a country in the Middle East. So yes, I've had to ask for, and I make sure that I will not travel until. And this has not happened only in the Gulf. It's happened around the world. I will not travel until you facilitate my arrival, or I'm not going. So,
wow.
Because I feel like I'm at a level where I don't need to, discrimination is not okay. It's not okay.
So what I wanted to get at next was, where do you see us as a Pakistani American community today? Obviously, there are ways in which we've come much far from 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But we still have a long way to go in terms of learning some of the lessons of your journey, in terms of speaking up, making our voices heard, showing up in those rooms, demanding a seat at the table. In many ways, the reason why I started this podcast was also to share these stories of our community and to realize how many inspirational and extraordinary Pakistani Americans we have, but whose stories we don't know. But I would love to hear from your vantage point. how would you view us as a community in terms of how far we've come, and what do you think we need to do to continue to move forward as a community within the broader American ecosystem and matrix and color of
Well,
life?
obviously, I think since the time that my family came to the United States in the mid 70s, we've come a long way. There have been advocacy groups, there are political action committees, there are people advocating not only as Pakistani Americans, Muslim Americans, where Pakistanis have made a great stride, and the fact that we are usually a professional and accomplished group. So to share our story now because of social media and things, and we have had a presence, and I think that serves as role models for the upcoming generation to see that, yes, I can strive to be a judge, I can strive to be, a top physician, and I can strive to be even a politician, right? When there's opportunities, and we're active in politics at the local level, at the sort of at not only the local level, but at the national level. And so, the fact that Pakistani Americans encourage other people to go and vote, so pursuing your civic duty, which is not something that people did in the 70s. We were taught about integration. Keep your head down and make sure you're doing the job and don't rock the boat, was the story that most people told, right? We just were here, we were called here to do a job, and we want to make sure we do the best. We're not going to advocate for our own rights. But I think as generations and as we've been trained in the United States, this is a country for all. And the democracy only works if we all have a seat at the table and we're advocating for our rights. And so the fact that people even say Black and brown people now, I think is a major accomplishment. When I was growing up, we never heard we had the rights of Black people, and that's about it. So the fact that people are saying brown and Black people, I think that's a major accomplishment. In Pakistanis, although we have these groups, there are tons of groups that go around. I think we still sort of segregate ourselves into people who we know, right? And there are groups like the American Pakistan Foundation and others that are really reaching out to younger generations. But I think doing more of that sort of mentoring, not only in the traditional fields, but other fields, and making our story known, I think it's still, a lot of it is word of mouth, or, word through contacts or social media. But if we could have more forums, like more national forums, where we could do that, and not just in the big enclaves where there are majority Pakistani Americans like New York, Chicago, LA, but really go to someone like me who lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, and to say, you too belong in this country, because I don't think there are many opportunities for people like that. And so whether it's a podcast, that's why I was so keen and interested in your podcast, because it has a broader reach. And it was for me, who had to come to Washington, to be able to integrate and to sort of realize my Pakistani identity and to embrace it. And it's not an opportunity that everybody has, right? And so it is. There are ways by which you can make a difference. And I'm proud to be mentoring several young Pakistani Americans who have come from North Carolina or Wisconsin, others, and I speak to them frequently about how they can engage, what colleges they should go to, what graduate degree they should pursue, how they can get into government. And I think some of them have really achieved some success. So every opportunity or every request I get, I make time to do it. And I participate in the State Department mentoring program. I've signed up for one for, Mosaic and a Muslim American, one on how to get into federal service, because it's not an easy nut to crack. It's really not. And it's not something that, like I said, I even thought about, because I just didn't know. And I'm glad that we're taking it more active, but I think we need to get out into beyond the enclaves of where there are lots of Pakistani Americans, and try to focus on other areas too.
Yeah, I think that that's really smart. And I think that, it has to be beyond the same enclaves and beyond the same people meeting each other again and again and again, and sort of really inviting and bringing more parts of the community in, so that there is a much broader conversation than what's happening right now. Saira, as we sort of bring this and try to wrap this, I want to give you the last word as you reflect even on our conversation today. Anything that's not been said, or anything that as we chatted different threads through this hour, any aha moment or surprise that you had as you were sort of sharing your story? Because I've been blown away by your story. I thought I knew you, but I had no idea in terms of the challenges that you've been through, how you've overcome them, the audacity and the persistence that comes with it. But any final sort of words from your side?
Well, I think as hyphenated Americans, some of us, especially who are not born here, we struggle with our sense of belonging. Whether or not we belong here, whether or not this is our country, whether we've taken citizenship at an early age or later age as we've developed our professional credentials, is this our country or do we belong to our country of origin? And it's a struggle that we all have. And I think not only those of us who are born abroad, but even those of us who are born here that, come from immigrant backgrounds. And we manage both of those. And I think the United States has realized that we should be proud that we are immigrants. We should be proud that we are diverse. And it's taken a long time for people to embrace as we approach this weekend of Juneteenth, and where people even realized, that it took 2 years after slavery, after the Emancipation Proclamation, for certain communities in the United States to realize that they were free. The United States has gone through many struggles. We are not a perfect country. But the fact that we still embrace minorities and that foreign-born citizens can represent the United States of America overseas as diplomats, as government representatives, is a major deal. Most countries do not allow that. And the fact that we can embrace this cultural, ethnic background of ours and our orientation and use it to our advantage is something that I would like to advocate and ensure that most people realize and use it to their advantage and not use it as a handicap or sort of impediment, as I think earlier in the United States was the case.
Thank you for sharing that, and what a beautiful note to end on. And I also feel like it's a very kind plug to the podcast name itself, which is Pehchaan, which is at the heart of what we're trying to uncover with this podcast, which is what does identity mean, particularly for Pakistani Americans. And I think today we've explored such an interesting character in terms of your life arc and what it teaches us about your identity, how it's evolved, and how, even though you've accomplished so many extraordinary things in your life, identity has both been the fuel as well as the challenge that you've had to overcome at different sort of moments in your life to keep you going and to keep you doing the things that you're doing. So it's incredible, the thread. When I originally started with this idea, I was like, does anybody really want to talk about identity? Does anybody really want to listen to a conversation about identity? And, talking to you today sort of shows why this is such an important conversation for us to have.
Thank you for recognizing and creating this podcast, because identity is something that we struggle with every day. And I said it's not only those of us who are hyphenated Americans or immigrants, but it's your average American, and I hear that over and over again. And I applaud the United States for giving us the space to do that. You see more and more people to say, yeah, just because I don't look like what America looks like or what movie stars look like doesn't mean I'm not American. And so I think it's the society that has given us the space. And thank you for recognizing identity and giving this space to Pakistani Americans. I think it's very important.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Saira. We really appreciate you, and good luck on your travel.
Most welcome. Thank you.